Hello and welcome. Today, we're diving deep into a concept that shapes our world, something we hear about all the time, but maybe don't always stop to think about: democracy. What is it, really? Where did it come from? And how did this radical idea, born in an ancient city, travel through thousands of years to become the system so many of us live under today? It's a story of thinkers, rebels, and everyday people fighting for a voice. So let's get started on this incredible journey from ancient Athens to the modern world. Our story begins over 2,500 years ago in the city-state of Athens, Greece. Before this, most societies were ruled by kings, emperors, or small groups of powerful nobles. The idea that regular citizens should have a say in how they were governed was, frankly, revolutionary. The word democracy itself comes from two Greek words: demos, meaning the people, and kratos, meaning rule or power. Rule by the people. Simple yet so profound. So, how did it work in Athens? Well, it wasn't quite like our elections today. Athenian democracy was direct. This meant that eligible citizens could show up to the assembly, the ecclesia, and vote directly on laws and policies. Imagine a massive town hall meeting where your vote could decide whether to go to war or build a new temple. To be an eligible citizen, you had to be a free, adult, land-owning male. So let's be clear, it was far from perfect. Women, slaves, and foreigners were completely excluded. It was a democracy for a select few, but it was a groundbreaking start. They also had a council of 500, chosen by lottery, to handle the day-to-day business of the city. Choosing officials by lot was a core feature, based on the belief that any citizen was capable of holding public office. It was a radical experiment in self-governance. After Athens' golden age, the flame of democracy flickered. The powerful Roman Republic emerged, which had democratic elements like assemblies and elected officials called tribunes who represented the common people. But it was more of a republic, a system of representation, than a direct democracy. And eventually, the republic fell, giving way to the Roman Empire, and for nearly 1,000 years after, Europe was dominated by monarchies, feudal lords, and the church. The idea of rule by the people seemed like a distant, almost mythical memory. But ideas are resilient. During the Renaissance, scholars rediscovered the classical texts of Greece and Rome. Thinkers began to question the divine right of kings. This intellectual reawakening paved the way for the Age of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries. Philosophers like John Locke in England argued that governments should have the consent of the governed and that people had natural rights to life, liberty, and property. Across the Channel in France, Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote about the social contract, the idea that a government's authority comes from an agreement with its people. These weren't just abstract theories. They were intellectual dynamite, laying the groundwork for real-world revolutions. And then the explosions came. First, in America. The American Revolution in 1776 wasn't just a war for independence. It was a war for an idea. The Declaration of Independence famously stated that all men are created equal, and that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The newly formed United States created a representative democracy, a republic where citizens elect officials to make decisions on their behalf. It was a massive step, applying Enlightenment ideals on a national scale. Just over a decade later, France erupted. The French Revolution of 1789 was even more radical in its aims. The rallying cry of liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity, echoed across Europe. The revolutionaries overthrew the absolute monarchy, executed the king, and attempted to establish a republic based on universal manhood suffrage. The French Revolution was chaotic and violent, and it ultimately led to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, but its ideals of democracy and human rights could not be uncorked. It sent shockwaves through the old monarchies of Europe, inspiring democratic movements for the next century. The 19th century was a slow, often bloody, march toward greater democracy. Across Europe and the Americas, people fought for written constitutions, the right to vote, and freedom of the press. The Industrial Revolution created a new working class who began to organize and demand political power. Suffrage, the right to vote, was gradually expanded. At first, it was just for property-owning men. Then, it slowly extended to all men. But a huge portion of the population was still silenced. This brings us to one of the most important struggles in the history of democracy: the fight for women's suffrage. For decades, courageous women, the suffragettes, campaigned, protested, and endured imprisonment and abuse for the simple right to cast a ballot. It was a long, hard-fought battle, but in the early 20th century, countries one by one began to grant women the right to vote. This was a monumental leap forward, making democracies far more representative of their actual populations. The 20th century was a brutal testing ground for democracy. It faced existential threats from new totalitarian ideologies, fascism and communism. World War II, in many ways, was a global conflict between democratic nations and authoritarian regimes. The victory of the Allies was a victory for the democratic ideal. After the war, decolonization movements swept across Asia and Africa. As empires crumbled, newly independent nations had to choose their form of government. Many, inspired by the principles of self-determination, chose democracy. India, for example, became the world's largest democracy, a title it still holds today. But the story doesn't end there. The late 20th century saw another wave of democratization. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union signaled the end of the Cold War and led to a surge of new democracies in Eastern Europe. From South Africa's dismantling of apartheid to the pro-democracy movements in Latin America and Asia, it seemed like democracy was on an unstoppable march across the globe. So where does that leave us today? Democracy is now the most common form of government in the world, but it's not without its challenges. In many places, it's fragile. We see issues like political polarization, the spread of misinformation online, voter apathy, and the rise of populist leaders who challenge democratic norms and institutions. The ancient Athenians worried about demagogues who could manipulate public opinion, and that's a fear that feels very relevant in the age of social media. The journey of democracy is a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom, for a voice, and for control over our own destiny. It wasn't handed down from on high. It was fought for inch by inch by countless individuals over thousands of years. It's a system that's constantly evolving, constantly being debated and refined, and its future isn't guaranteed. It relies on active participation, on informed citizens, on the willingness to engage in debate, and on the protection of rights for everyone, not just a select few. The story of democracy is our story, and it's a story that we are all still writing every single day. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey through history interesting, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas that shape our world. See you next time.